By the time the sun rose on a new year, January 1st, 1945, the situation was looking desperate. For the German and Hungarian defenders of Budapest, supply lines were running dry. Fehérigyi Airport, a critical asset for the defenders, had fallen on December 27th. The Danube River had frozen, extinguishing the hope of resupply by barge. Hitler had already declared Budapest a fortress city, stating that it must be defended to the last man. The city was now well and truly under siege. For the Russians outside Budapest, there was no mood for mercy. Memories of Stalingrad, of Leningrad, and of countless other bloody battles and sieges on Soviet soil saw to that. They would taste victory at all costs. Either the defenders would hand over the city to them, or there would be a heavy toll to pay for resistance. In the end, it was the latter option. The Axis units at Budapest held out until mid-February 1945, fighting on and refusing to give in until the bitter end. In the panicked final hours, soldiers and civilians would attempt to escape. Some would make it, thousands would be cut down in the attempt, and as the Soviet forces moved in to take their latest prize, they would find entire Axis divisions destroyed. The 22nd SS Volunteer Cavalry Division Maria Theresia, the 8th SS Cavalry Division Florian Geyer, the 1st Hungary Corps, among others, almost annihilated. World War I was human conflict at its most horrific, its most heinously terrifying. It was also human conflict taken to an industrial scale. If the First World War fed brave troops into meat grinders during futile assaults, the Second World War did the same thing but with the pretense of sophistication. The first truly modern war, perhaps, but a slaughter by any other name is still a slaughter. Annihilation is still annihilation. In this video, we're going to be telling the stories of those units at the Siege of Budapest and of many others that were destroyed over the course of the war. If there is no surrender, there's only victory or destruction. Well, hopefully your units managed to avoid destruction in War Thunder, the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made. Play on PC, Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5 or the previous console generation to experience thrilling and immersive PvP in the 2,000 tanks, planes, helicopters and ships War Thunder offers. Their collection of vehicles spans over 100 years of development, and an in-depth customization tool allows you to apply hundreds of epic camouflages, historical markings, and 3D decorators such as bushes. For the realists out there, War Thunder offers breathtaking graphics in 4K resolution while also ensuring that each hit accurately damages you or your enemy's vehicle. As someone who loves playing War Thunder on the PS5, this is one of my favorite things. Being able to see exactly which component was damaged or which crew member was actually hurt. In order to experience epic vehicular warfare in all eras, including World War II, click my link in the description below to sign up with a large free bonus pack, including multiple premium vehicles, a premium account, boosters, and much more. The brutal events of June 6, 1944 and the heroic capture of the landing areas on the beaches of Normandy by Allied troops are often thought of as the beginning of the end of the war in Europe. There's quite a lot wrong with this oversimplified view, and there was a hell of a lot more fighting to do. Many of Germany's best units were still in the field, and they weren't going down without a fight. Among these units was the 3rd Parachute Division. A Luftwaffe unit, these hardened paratroopers knew how to fight. When they arrived in Normandy on June 10th, they were ready to make life difficult for the Allies. "Those Germans are the best damn soldiers I ever saw," an American commander would say of the new opponents. "They're smart and they don't know what fear means. They come in and they keep coming until they get their job done, or you kill them. Or you kill them." This would be the objective, but it would not come easily. First of all, this was a full-strength unit, numbering almost 16,000 men. It was incredibly well drilled and equipped with formidable weaponry. The division was also commanded by Lieutenant General Richard Schrimpf, a highly effective soldier and First World War veteran. With a beachhead established at Normandy, the Allies began their dogged breakout across northern France. The 3rd Parachute Division inflicted heavy losses on the invaders, but already the supply chain had begun to break down. The 3rd Parachute's motorized vehicles had not been delivered, severely hindering their mobility. The division resorted to commandeering vehicles from locals, but this proved to be insufficient. What's more, the division came under punishing assaults from the Allies as aerial bombardments and shelling took a heavy toll on the 3rd Parachute's ranks. By mid-August, the division was part of a large contingent of German troops pinned down within the infamous Falaise Pocket, and the trap sprung by British, American, Canadian, and Polish Allied troops was about to swing shut. During one last breakout attempt from Falaise on August 20th, General Schrimpf was severely wounded by a 20mm shell. He was removed from the field, hospitalized, but would survive. Thousands of his soldiers would not be so lucky. The following day, the Falaise Pocket was sealed and the fighting in this part of France was over. The 3rd Parachute Division was shattered almost completely, its former combatants strewn lifeless across the French countryside. Charlemagne, the great 8th century king of the Franks, the people for whom modern-day France takes its name. Ruler of the Holy Roman Empire from the seat of Aachen, modern-day Germany. A great unifier in what has frequently been a fractured and unharmonious history. The perfect name for a French unit fighting within the German army. Also known as the 33rd Waffen Grenadier Division of the SS, Charlemagne was a unit from Vichy, France, fighting under the tricolour flag, but an integral part of the Waffen SS German fighting force. The Vichy division fought well, it fought hard, and it refused to give up, even when all seemed lost. Berlin, April 30th, 1945. Adolf Hitler is dead. With defeat assured, he put a bullet in his own head rather than face his captors. Soviet forces, still eager to avenge their own sickening losses at the hands of the Germans in the previous years, are advancing on Berlin. The Blitzkrieg, swift, brutal, decisive, is a distant memory, and Germany is on its knees. One of the commonly held images of Berlin at the end of the war is a ragtag army. Kids, elderly people, the sick and infirm in a desperate attempt to stop the Soviet advance. This is true to an extent, but there were battle-hardened units there too. Units like Charlemagne. By the end of April though, they were battered, broken, beaten down. What had been a unit of more than 7,000 men had come close to destruction during the East Pomeranian offensive of February 1945, as Soviet troops pushed through Poland and into Prussia. A small contingent of these men regrouped and fell back to Berlin, where they were commanded by Henri-Joseph Fenet. Whether or not the men of the Charlemagne division knew of Hitler's death, of the breakdown of command, of the irresistible Allied advance and Axis capitulation all over Europe, we don't know. But they would have known what they saw. A city in ruins, littered with bodies, the red Soviet flags, the T-34 tanks, the victorious voices calling out in Russian. Their own dwindling ranks. They would have seen the end coming. But still, they fought on. On April 30th, Fenet and his SS brigade ran guerrilla sorties out among the smashed masonry and cratered streets on tank hunting missions, taking out 21 of the machines while suffering heavy casualties of their own. The next morning would be a bleak one for Charlemagne. Only around 30 men remained, and they were starving, wounded, and facing defeat. This was it. They'd split into two groups and attempt their escape from the stricken city. Many would surrender to the Red Army before they even made it out of Berlin, but some escaped, including Fenet. But the situation outside Berlin was just as futile. Fenet, along with just a few of his men, surrendered to British forces soon after their escape. Some of the division's few survivors were handed over to the Russians. These were the lucky ones. Those who were handed back to their French compatriots were shot as traitors. Charlemagne numbered around 7,340 men in February 1945. 3 months later, only 300 remained alive to defend Berlin. All but a handful would perish here. In the cloying heats of the desert, beset by dust and dirt and grime, the hull of a tank can swiftly become a coffin. At the Second Battle of El Alamein 1942, The 21st Panzer Division would discover the wicked truth of this as their vehicles went from mobile bastions to death chambers in the face of the Allied advance. Things had started well for the Germans. The British were in disarray in North Africa. After repelling an invasion of Egypt from Italian Libya, the British forces found themselves struggling to achieve the same superiority in the Sahara when General Erwin Rommel and his German forces stepped into the fray in spring 1941. The British army was pushed back into Egypt, finding itself routed by the brilliance of Rommel and his divisions. At El Alamein, however, they made their stand, taking advantage of a narrow strip of land bordered by the sea to the north and the impassable Qattara Depression to the south. July 1942. In soaring temperatures and hellish conditions, the British stopped the Axis advance. Axis and Allied bodies littered the sands, shattered shells of tanks smouldered in the dust. The affair had been a bloody stalemate, but that was all the British needed. They began to regroup. Commanders Harold Alexander and Bernard Montgomery bolstered their forces, ready to drive the Axis powers back westwards across the desert. Rommel was no fool. He saw what was to come. His plan was an audacious one, to advance into Egypt, squeezing the Allied forces until the Germans at Stalingrad could declare victory in the east and put Persia under threat. Rommel's plan would never be enacted. On October 23rd, the British attack began. The 21st Panzer was stationed on the south side of the battlefield beside the Italian 132nd Ariete Division. Looking eastwards into Egypt, they may have seen the Allied positions, the British 50th Infantry alongside the Greek Brigade, with more British units and a Free French division to the south. The following day, the 21st, would see action, surging southeast along with the 132nd Ariete to reinforce the Italian lines under Allied assault. On October 25th, Allied troops changed their tack. They decided to concentrate their efforts on the 185th Folgore Division in the Italian front line, attacking from 3 directions and inflicting heavy casualties. And yet still, there was no breakthrough. Finally, on the afternoon of the 26th, there was a breakthrough, but it was to the north. The 51st Highlanders had taken Kidney Ridge. New Zealander, Australian and South African regiments were advancing. The Axis line could be breaking. Frantically, the mobile 21st Panzer was redeployed to the north. They engaged the Highlanders on Kidney Ridge along with the 15th Panzer and 133rd Littorio, but it was a futile effort. The dogged Scotsmen refused to budge, and the 21st Panzer sensed the battle slipping from their grasp. The fighting was now most intensive in the north, and the 21st Panzer, defending the railway line, was taking the brunt of it. First, on Halloween 1942, Australian troops attempted a breakthrough. In danger of being overpowered, the 21st Panzer managed to hold out. Then, 2 days later, the tank battle of Tel Akir, a last chance to halt the Allied advance. Shattered, exhausted, running on empty, the 21st Panzer engaged once again, Rommel banking everything on what remained of his best units. But by now, the momentum had shifted in favor of the Allies. The rout began. The 21st Panzer was destroyed, along with the Italian Trento, Bologna and Ariete divisions. The heroes of Rommel's Panzer divisions, the armored warhorses of North Africa, littered the landscape, their once formidable tanks now blackened, lifeless tombs to be reclaimed by the desert sands. The final weeks of 1941 were a desperate scramble for United States forces. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th had just been the beginning, and Imperial Japanese forces unleashed hell on Southeast Asia, tearing through Thailand, Malaya, and the Philippines. The USA was now a part of the global conflict, but already it was in danger of losing vital bases in the Pacific, not least in the Philippines. On Boxing Day, the 4th Marine Regiment was deployed in the island of Corregidor in Manila Bay, ready to defend the Filipino capital. They believed their position to be a good one. Captain John Clark would later describe the sense of optimism that came over the troops. A feeling of safety and security came over us as we reached the rock, he wrote. We were told it was impregnable and that we had nothing to fear from Japanese attack. But Japanese bombing raids soon began to shatter this illusion. As 1942 dawned, the 4th Marines found themselves under an intense assault as Japanese planes hammered the position. Then, just like that, the assaults abated, but only temporarily. By the time February rolled around, period Japanese raids were commonplace, and these attacks intensified as the Japanese continued their advance across the archipelago. The 4th Marines weren't sitting idly by. They were reinforcing, preparing themselves for whatever might come their way. On April 9th, Bataan fell, and the Japanese troops under General Homer turned their attentions to Manila and Corregidor. The showdown with the 4th Marines Regiment was imminent. It was almost another month, May 5th, by the time the 1st Japanese forces landed on Corregidor, ready for the final assault. The arrival was heralded by intense shelling. The Marines and their Filipino comrades were ready for the invaders. What followed was nothing short of horrific. A spectacle that confounded the imagination, an observer would say, surpassing in grim horror anything we had ever seen before. The Japanese had the weight of numbers on their side, as well as the weight of hardware. Waves of invaders poured onto the island, pushing the defenders back. On the slopes of the Denver Battery Hill, the Marines made a stand, stalling the invaders with vicious hand-to-hand fighting. The counterattack was a scene of unbelievable heroism from the Americans and from the Filipinos fighting alongside them. Lieutenant Otter of the 4th Marines took a group of soldiers and knocked out a heavy Japanese machine gun pit, scoring a significant victory for the Allied forces, but it would not last. A group of Japanese soldiers coming up from the rear overwhelmed Otter and his men, leaving no survivors. By 4:30 AM on May 6th, the defenders' ranks were dwindling. The night had exacted a heavy toll on the 4th Marines and other units on the island. Sniper fire cut the Allies down where they stood. Redeployment and resupply seemed impossible. An hour later, more Japanese reinforcements landed, followed by 3 tanks at 9:30 AM. The situation was now impossible. Sheltering in a concrete trench, sustaining horrendous fire from Japanese artillery, the few survivors of the 4th Marine Regiment made a difficult decision. There's a limit of human endurance, the Marine commander, Lieutenant General Jonathan Wainwright, said in a message to President Roosevelt. And that point has long been passed. The surviving Marines surrendered at Corregidor at 1:30 PM that same day. Cisterna, Italy, 1944. Allied forces landing at Anzio can't go anywhere while the town of Cisterna di Lottoria remains in enemy hands. Not for the first time in this war, and not for the last, it falls to the Rangers to lead the way. The 1st and 3rd Battalions would go first, followed by the 4th Rangers and the 3rd Battalion 15th Infantry Regiment. Penetrating behind enemy lines, 1st and 3rd Rangers began their assault in the early hours of the morning. Shrouded in darkness, the units navigated through German positions, but the growing daylight caught them off guard. Suddenly exposed, the Rangers were set upon by a dawn counterattack from the 715th Infantry Division, supported by Panzer tanks. The Rangers knew there were Germans in the area, but they had no idea how many. The Axis had brought in reinforcements just the previous evening, and the Rangers were woefully outmanned and outgunned. The Rangers' 1st Battalion commander, Major Jack Dobson, was said to have taken out one of the Panzers personally, armed with a pistol and a white phosphorus grenade, before being wounded in action. Major Alva Miller of the 3rd Battalion would be killed. 1st and 3rd Rangers held out in the knowledge that the 4th Battalion was not far behind. Right across the Anzio perimeter, Allied defensive units attacked, seeking to break the German lines and rescue the stricken Rangers. All 3 battalions sustained heavy casualties. 1st and 3rd suffered 12 killed, 36 wounded, and 743 captured. 4th Rangers lost 30 souls, with 58 wounded. The Rangers had fought with staggering bravery, but their deployment on such a mission drew criticism. Whether rightly or wrongly deployed, the Rangers ceased to be an effective fighting force in Italy, and the battalions were disbanded after the Battle of Cisterna. This brings us back to Hungary, to Budapest, and to 2 great armies on very different trajectories. Beyond the boundaries of the city, we have the Soviet Red Army, pushed back almost to obliteration in 1942, and now driving westwards toward the German heartlands. Within the Hungarian capital, the Axis forces are holding out. Once all-conquering and on the offensive, now very much on the back foot. Even by February 1945, when all seemed hopeless, Hitler ordered the Axis troops to remain. Budapest must stay strong. And yet, the resupply from outside the city, already struggling under the strain, had all but dried up. The battered defenders of the city were told to stand firm and face death for a cause that had essentially abandoned them. By February 11th, the Axis will was broken. Soldiers began to flee, withdrawing from their positions and pushing through snow and ice to what they hoped would be safety. It was not safety. Under cover of darkness and wrapped in bitter cold, the Soviet troops lay in wait around Charlemagne Square. What is now a thriving transport hub in the charming city of Budapest became the scene of a desperate struggle for survival. The first wave of fleeing Axis soldiers, with civilians among them, masked their movements in the rolling fog that hung over the square. Many would reach safety. But now, the Soviets were ready. They poured a heavy fire on the following waves, and thousands died in their desperate bid for escape. To the north of the city, the Marine Regiment Waffen SS Division was attempting one last breakout. The steely resolve that had brought them this far remained, and they began to drive through the Russian lines to the very limits of the city in the forlorn hope of linking up with other German regiments. The Soviet armored divisions who witnessed this response were unmoved. They seized the advantage and wiped the Marine Regiment from the face of the earth. Both the 1st Hungarian Corps and the Florian Gaia SS Cavalry were similarly dispatched, woefully under-equipped to face a confident Red Army after such a long time under siege. In total, the encirclement of Budapest lasted for 102 days, far longer than the sieges of Berlin and Vienna, and far more brutal for the local civilian population, even than Leningrad and Stalingrad. More than 100,000 civilians, 1/8 of the city's population, perished due to fighting, starvation, execution, and forced labor. Another 38,000 Axis troops and 80,000 Soviets would also be killed in the city. Budapest, a city of culture and beauty and one of the most popular city break destinations in Europe, bore witness to almighty carnage and bloodshed in the war's final year. Carnage and bloodshed that, outside of Hungary at least, has been largely forgotten. The Second World War brings us stories of unimaginable suffering and tragedy, but also heroism. On both sides, soldiers fought with bravery and selflessness, finding themselves in situations most could never, or hopefully could never, even begin to imagine. Whether through receiving the wrong orders, making the wrong call, or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time, entire divisions of these soldiers were sometimes wiped from the map. We've told a few of these stories today, but there's plenty more. What do you think of the units we've discussed today? Which stories were the most jaw-dropping or the most devastating? Are there any other stories of units that were destroyed that you'd like to see us cover? Let us know all that and more in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new. Massive thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring the video. To experience epic World War II PvP battles in planes, tanks, ships, and much more, be sure to head to the link in my description and take advantage of the massive free bonus pack War Thunder is offering, including multiple premium vehicles, premium account features, boosters, and much more.